African Adam and Eve, per mtDNA, are the first modern-like humans to migrate out of Africa. They include the various types of black peoples: black Australoids, black Pygmoids, and black Negroids. Enter Europe, Asia, Siberia, Australia, Melanesia, and the Americas. Then you Indians, or you so-called Indians, come and tell me that Australoids have nothing to do with Africans when we come from the same first modern human-like family.
These maps of the Omo Valley region, the oldest modern humans, 195,000 years old, coming up out of this region, as I said, migrating around the world from the early documentation that we see here today.
The Japan Times, May 12, 2001. You read again. DNA evidence backs up out of Africa human origin theory. DNA-based evidence for early migrations into India. So you see, there's DNA-based evidence that the first Indians, the first people to come into India and Asia, were Africans. The Negroid or Negrito people of prehistoric India were the first human inhabitants. Again, it says the Negritos were supplemented by later immigrants, the Proto-Australoids. Another black race, another part of the black race, another part of Africans.
So going back to the history, what is the connection between India and Africa? So I'm trying to bridge the gap. There is a distinct and clear connection between the ancient India and the ancient Africa. And that is where I want to go back to the Indus Valley civilization. I think most of you would have heard that, or maybe would have studied in school, which is as ancient as the Egypt Nile Valley civilization. The original inhabitants or the original creators of the Indus Valley civilization, which is also called Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, or Harappan civilization, was created by the black man. People came from Africa. About 7,000 BC, which is 9,000 years back, maybe even earlier than that. They brought agriculture. They domesticated most of the animals. They were highly civilized. They had two-story buildings, sanitation systems, sewage system. They had a built-in screening system in the sewage, so the solids would not block the liquid passage. They had chutes, so they can drop the garbage from the upper level to lower levels. They had individual wells. They had courtyards. Highly civilized conditions they were living. They're very peaceful agricultural people. Very well flourishing civilization. This is the original black people.
They were an African group who had left Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, the Nile Valley. They went there with Thutmose III, and before Thutmose III, with other conquering people. They remain in India today, remnants of their families. They are called Dravidians, Tamils, and other such names, including untouchables. Those people, religion, and then they took on the name, by the way, Elamites. E-L-A-M, Elam, was what was Ur, Chaldea, became Ur-Elam. In other words, as the Africans conquered that land, on their way all the way to India as conquerors, they changed the name of the land of Chaldea to the name of Elam, E-L-A-M.
India used to be called, long time ago, Eastern Ethiopia.
The cradle of African civilization by the way of Ethiopia was Central Africa. Ethiopia was Central Africa. Relying on classical authors, Hansberry began in his lectures to outline the antiquity of the classical world's intimacy with Ethiopia. His basic argument was that there was clearly contact and interaction between Ethiopians and the people of the Eastern Mediterranean basin hundreds of years prior to the first notations and the earliest use of the term Ethiopian by Homer in the 9th century BC. Clearly an important part of the populations of Arabia, Mesopotamia, Persia and India were of Ethiopian descent. This conclusion was further substantiated by Herodotus' comments concerning the Eastern Ethiopian.
As I said, the worship there was the worship of goddess Het Heru, or otherwise Hathor, who was symbolized as an African woman with the ears of a cow, or shown as a cow. For those of you who have been to Egypt, at Abu Simbel, you saw her shown in the temple of Nefertari. You saw her at the funerary temple of Makari Hatshepsut, at the Valley of the King. You saw her in Dendera, in a temple built to honor Hathor. You saw her the most expressed. And you saw her in many other temples throughout Egypt, because in every temple there's got to be at least one reference to goddess Hathor, or Het Heru. That African woman, or goddess, was worshipped by every people who had contact with the Africans of ancient times before the Common Era.
And the best known of the goddess was the goddess Hathor. And that her influence was so great that it spread to Asia, and the concept of the sacred cow in India came from an aspect of the religion of Hathor. And when you see her drawn in history, you will see a female with a cow's body. It was the sacredness of this image that gave them the concept of the sacredness of the cow. And that this is part of the Hindu religion. This is part of where the sacred cow concept came.
The worship of the golden calf that is in India. It comes from the worship of Het Heru that was taken into India by Asar and the Nile Valley Africans, the Ethiopians, that moved into that realm and started the Indian Kushite, Hindu Kushite civilization. This BBC documentary tells us about the great dwarf deities of Egypt, Bes and Ptah. Here is two deities, the two earliest deities of Egypt, Ptah and Bes. Now, you can even see Bes, which is a Twa, the lion was sacred to Bes. Now, if that's in India, that's, I think, what's that deity's name? I think it might be Kali. Okay. Now, you see the lion right there now. See, that's the symbolism of Bes. You got to understand that's Bes. How did it get in India? How did it get into India? So how can he say Asia brought anything into Africa when we can clearly show we took it there? Now this is an image of Osiris, Asar, that is in the Louvre Museum. Look at this face. It is truly African. Reading from Diodorus Siculus, Greek historian of 1st century BCE, he states, Osiris being coming to the borders of Ethiopia, raised high banks on either side of the river, lest in the time of his inundation it should overflow the country more than was convenient, and make it marshy and boggy, and made floodgates to let in the water by degrees as far as was necessary. This he passed through Arabia, bordering upon the Red Sea as far as to India, and the utmost coasts that were inhabited. He built likewise many cities in India, one of which he called Naza, willing to have a remembrance of that in Egypt where he was brought up. Here is the documentation from the 1st century BCE, where the Greek historian is relating to us the information of this black god, Asa, who had educated even the Indian. And that god Asa became Krishna in the Indian realm. And you see that the Indians paint themselves black to remember the great god Asa. Krishna means black in Sanskrit. It means black. And this is where the Ethiopians who created the Hindu Kush civilization in that area came from, up out of the Nile. So we have to understand that all of these civilizations are given birth to by the Nile Valley Africans.